Hey, Leadership 201, and welcome to our next video in our online lecture series. Today, we're going to talk about one of my personal favorite topics, ethics, and ethics in leadership more specifically. So let's go ahead and begin. So today, we're going to first talk about leadership and ethics together and really dive into what we call practical ethical theory, talk about some of the principles of ethical leadership, and also some really diverse perspectives on what ethical leadership really means. So first and foremost, before we even dive in, I want to preface that today's lecture is really the first time we're not actually talking about our leadership theory whatsoever. So leadership ethics is really all encompassing in the fact that everybody has some different form of ethics that they possess, and really leadership is no different. So leadership ethics really work in tandem and really describe the leader and not really any specific theory, which is pretty cool. I know ethics can sound like a pretty dry topic off the beginning, so I'll try to make this as interesting as possible for you. Um, but ethics, nonetheless, are very important in how we study leadership and seeing how leaders interact with followers and in a context and an ethical component. A lot of the times we kind of neglect that ethical component, but it's really important in analyzing the leadership process and kind of understanding where leaders are coming from whenever they make the decisions that they make and kind of do what they do. So let's first kind of jump in and get some definitions out of the way. So the word ethics is a Greek word. It comes from a derivative of the Greek word ethos, which means customs, conduct, or character that one possesses. So ethics is really concerned with the kinds of values and the morals an individual or society really has come to know as desirable or appropriate. So a lot of this comes from socialization, and this kind of dives into the whole nature versus nurture debate. But really, ethics focuses on what we call the virtuousness of individuals and their motives. So ethics in itself is really important because everybody has kind of a unique set of ethics. Not one person, not one society really shares the exact same set. And that's what makes somebody really unique, especially in a leadership context. So, a good example of ethics, and one of the big reasons actually ethics comes into discussion is like think about journalists, for example, and having a respect for others and being professional and being really proactive and engaging somebody socially. Ethics is really important to being a journalist to have values and morals, and sometimes it's questionable, especially in today's society. But nonetheless, it's very important as leaders in any aspect of our life to really possess a set of values and morals and belief system really to help guide all the decisions that we make. So before we dive into ethics, we're going to kind of take a step out and talk about a theory that happened in the early 50s and 60s by a pretty famous researcher named Kohlberg. And many of you probably have already heard of this, of Kohlberg's stages of moral development. But this is really a psychology, a developmental psychology theory that doesn't really have to do a lot with ethics, but it does have a little bit to do with the moral components. And basically what Kohlberg is saying is there's these three major phases that individuals go through in life. And within there's a total of 6 levels. So as we're young, we're children, we start off at level 1, which is called pre-conventional morality. So the level 1, stage 1, is the first obedience and punishment. So the rules are really fixed and kind of handed down by authority. Think about this as your parents. They have a set of rules, and if you don't comply with them, especially when you're a little tiny kid, they're going to make some type of punishment or correction in your behavior. So our first really taste of developing our morals are defined by this idea of obedience and punishment. But as we grow up, then we see what they call the stage 2, which is this idea of individualism and exchange. So basically, what this part of Kohlberg's model is saying is if an action is right, if it serves the individual. So basically, if I put something into it, if I do this, it's going to help me in some type of way, almost what we call like a self-serving bias. But it's really important to think about it kind of as a young person. We're only going to really do something that's going to benefit us in some way. So the next phase is kind of the general adulthood phase, or early adulthood. We go into what Kohlberg defines as stage 2, which they call conventional morality. So typically, the standard morality of the society as a whole. And with that, stage 3, interpersonal accord and conformity, is really conform to the expectations of others. So the morality, the beliefs and value systems of those around you, whether that's your family, the society, or the organization that you exist inside. This is really the stage where people start getting a lot of these norms socialized upon them when it comes to their morals and beliefs. And you know, stage four, really maintaining the social order, is one of the last stages a lot of people really kind of hit in life. And we really won't dive into a lot of what Kohlberg's work because there is some flaws to it and it's really generalizing. But stage four, maintaining the social order, moral decisions really show concern for society as a whole. So the individual, you as a person, have a concern for society as a greater good. Not committing crime, doing the right thing kind of when nobody's looking per se. So that's kind of where most people rely and lie on Kohlberg stages of moral development. But now, level three, post conventional morality, is kind of the pinnacle of having good moral development. Stage five, really what they call social contract and individual rights. This is really where moral decisions are based on what a good society should be like. So, really kind of promoting that justice, promoting that work to really help better humanity. And last on the top stage of Kohlberg stages is really universal principles. So all moral decision making is really based on these internalized universal principles of justice that apply to everybody. So we can kind of take a better look here from your textbook on what Kohlberg's model looks at, and we can kind of see level one, really about that self-interest, avoiding punishment, and focusing on rewards. Level two, really reasoning based on society's views and expectations, and then level three, that post-conventional, where reasoning is really based on consciousness and really creating a just society. So let's kind of scrap that, walk back into our conversation about ethics now, and really talk about what ethical theory is. So ethical theory provides a system of rules or principles as a guide in making decisions about what is right or wrong, or kind of good and bad in a certain situation. And ethical theory really provides a basis for understanding what it means to be a morally decent human being. So really, your moral compass is what ethical theory is. So let's talk about the two broad domains of ethical theory, and we're going to spend some time talking about this. So the first one is what we call conduct-based domains, and then character-based domains. We're going to spend some time here first talking about conduct, and really talking about this first type called teleological theories, which is the consequences that we face. And then with that, there's some things called altruism, ethical egoism, and utilitarianism. And then also under conduct, we talk about something called duty, which is deontological theories. And then on the other end of the spectrum, that broad domain, I will talk about something called virtue-based theories under character. So this chart right here really kind of spaces out, and you can kind of really see it's a typical grid. So on the bottom axis, we have a concern for the interests of others. And then on the other axis, we have kind of a concern for self-interest. So we'll kind of go through these main three parts of the theory here. So talking about ethical egoism, utilitarianism, and altruism. Let's go ahead and begin. So like we said, teleological theory is really first, I'll kind of move out there so you can see, focuses on the consequences of actions and results. So like I said, under the conduct basis, we have these four main points to teleological theory. So first, it's ethical egoism. So really that really high level of self-service and low regard for the service of others. So this is really closely related to transactional leadership theories, where really they're trying to create the greatest good for the leader. Um, so think about it as a good example here is a leader really taking a political stance on an issue for no other reason than just to receive re-election, not even really maybe wanting to follow through with that, but just nonetheless taking that stance and so they can fulfill the needs that they have to get reelected. Utilitarianism is kind of in that middle. So really creating the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And it's pretty self-explanatory. It's really in the middle of everything. And this really type of leader distributes scarce resources as to maximize benefit for everybody, really trying to hurt the fewest people. And, really what's important is kind of thinking of maybe from like a medical aspect, and also really kind of right now in our COVID-19, if we look maybe something where Italy, for example, kind of had to utilize utilitarianism-based ethical practices because they had such a overwhelming number of people coming in at once to receive healthcare, and they had to kind of make some decisions. How are we going to make these types of triages to benefit the greatest good. Um, and altruism is another great one. This is when the leader is really selfless and showing concern for best interest of others. So this is what we call true, authentic, transformational leadership. And think about somebody like Mother Teresa or Gandhi, who really gave and dedicated their entire life to advancing their causes in a very ethical fashion. So again, under the conduct domain, we have deontological theories, and this is what we call a duty-driven theory. So it relates not only to the consequences, but also to whether an action in itself is a good thing. So deontological theory really focuses on the actions of the leader and his or her moral obligation and responsibility to do the right thing. So, for example, telling the truth, keeping promises, being fair, obeying the law, these are all deontological things that we have had ingrained into us from a pretty young age. Whether we choose to, obey that or not, that's a whole different thing. But deontological theories is kind of this duty that we have to ourselves and to others and to society to maintain these moral obligations. So, on the other end of the spectrum is what we call that character based domain of ethical theory. And really, the key part of that is what we call virtue based theory, which is all about somebody's character. So, uh, character really kind of focusing on who people are as the people. Um, and somebody that has really a good virtue based ethical theory, really, rather than tell people what to do, tell people what to be. And they really help people become more virtuous through training and development. And virtues are really present within this person's disposition, and practice makes kind of these good values habitual. So these are the things that we see in ethics, like courage and honesty, fairness, justice, integrity, humility. These are things that are developed over time, and it's not just so much like we just talked about deontological, where it's a duty. It's not something you have to do, but it's something that's good to do. It's something that's to help develop you as your own moral character under these virtue-based theories. So, why does ethics in itself really matter when we talk about leadership? And there are millions of answers you could give here, but really simmering down to some of these kings, the centrality of ethics to leadership. First and foremost, that influence dimension of leadership really requires a leader to have an impact on the lives of followers, and through that, it's important that the leader is ethical, because you're having such a high level of touch on somebody's life and an impact on them. It's important to maintain the utmost level of ethics possible. Also, power in itself. We talked a lot about French and Raven's power at the beginning of the semester. Um, really, these control differences create an enormous amount of ethical responsibility for the leaders, and it's important that with power comes great responsibility per se, and having that good ethical responsibility or ethical duty to your followers is very important. And really having a respect for the person and this being sensitive to the followers' own needs and interests is very important in ethical leadership as well. But leaders ultimately they help to establish the organizational value systems that are created within an organization, and really kind of create what we call this ethical climate. So it's important that leaders themselves are very ethical, so that in turn the organization that they create and become a part of also is ethical. So we talk about some professors of leadership and talking about ethics in themselves. Uh, so Heifetz was another big researcher in the ideas of ethics and leadership. So Heifetz's work really emphasizes how leaders help followers to confront conflicting values and how to affect change from conflict. And really, it takes perspective that ethics speak directly to values of workers and the values of organizations and the communities in which they work. So Heifetz basically says that leaders use authority to mobilize followers to first get people focused on issues, next act as a reality test regarding information, also manage and frame issues, orchestrate conflicting perspectives, and facilitate the decision-making process. So really Heifetz sees a system of ethics and how leadership comes together. But the foremost part of this, it's really important that leaders use their authority to really mobilize followers to get people focused on these issues, like we were saying. So through all of this, a leader is really providing what we call this holding environment, which is a supportive context and where there's trust, nurturance, and empathy. And really, the leader's duty at this point is that they must assist a follower ethically in struggling with change and personal growth. So all of this is really important with having ethics. And another perspective of leadership, which is really heavily related to ethics in itself, is Burns' perspective on the theory of transformational leadership, which we already talked about a little bit. So, with that really strong emphasis on followers' needs and values and morals, leaders really help their followers in personal struggles concerning conflicting values and having these key values like liberty and justice and equality. So, that's really high level of morality and this connection between the two. And it's really important that leaders maintain that level of ethical responsibility, and they really assist their followers in assessing their own value systems and needs and beliefs. It ultimately help their followers rise to a higher level of ethical, um, existence. Honestly, so with ethics, comes a conversation also about the dark side of leadership, and this is a great another segue into our Leadership 301 course that we teach, and it really talks a lot about some of the problems that we see in leadership. So with the dark side of leadership, a lot of times we talk about that pseudo transformational leadership, and I utilize the example of somebody like Adolf Hitler, who during World War II, really did a major transformation, but did it for the own purposes of serving his own cause, his own good, which ultimately was very destructive to human rights. So some work by individual named Lippmann Blumen really characterized destructive behaviors such as violating basic human rights and integrity, and really characterize these personal characteristics of leaders that are unethical on the dark side, and things like lacking integrity, insatiable ambition and arrogance. And additionally, there's some other work out there from various leadership and ethical scholars that talk about these different factors of perceived toxicity in leaders, things like managerial incompetency, dark traits, derisive supervision, impervious despotic leadership, all of these really crazy words, but it's really important to understand more or less some of these things that can come together, and where ethics sometimes are tested to create some really bad things. So jumping back to what we talked about throughout the class on kind of the leader follower context environment, let's break it down into kind of this thing that we call the dark triad, or the triangle of bad leadership here. So we have destructive leaders, these conducive environments, and also susceptible followers. So destructive leaders are those who possess like charisma, personalized power, being very narcissistic, negative life things, and an ideology of hate, and coupled in an environment that's is full of instability and threats and really bad value systems. It really can create followers to either be one of two groups: a conformer or a colluder. So a conformer is somebody that has unmet needs, has a low self-evaluation, low maturity, and they kind of want to just go with the flow. We also have followers that are colluders, so they're ambitious with these similar worldviews and bad values. So they themselves are trying to serve their own needs. But it's really important to understand that dark leadership and bad leadership can happen and kind of under our nose without even really thinking about it. So it's important to understand that kind of all mixed together. This can have some really bad impacts on organizations. So in this toxic triangle, like I was saying, is really those three key categories of destructive leaders, acceptable followers, and a conducive environment to let that flow in. But let's talk about ethical leadership now. Really, the fundamental is ethical leaders respect one another and everybody. So ethics is really central to leadership because it's all about the process of influence, and there's really a need to engage followers to accomplish those mutual goals. And the impact that leaders have is on establishing the organizational values requires a lot of ethics, because in turn, the ethics that that leader possesses will then in turn become a part of the organization's ethical system as well. So, kind of looking now, there's really these five core tenets of ethical leadership, and it's kind of modeled there below for you. We'll break into each one of these here in just a second. So, first and foremost, we have the respect for others, service to others, the showing of justice, a manifestation of honesty, and a building of community. So, the first one is respecting others, really treating others as their own end goals rather than as a means to the leader's personal goals. So, a leader really that's respecting others is listening closely to their followers and is really empathetic towards them, and is tolerant of any opposing viewpoints that they have. And a good leader that's presenting good ethics, a leader should really treat other people's values and decisions with respect. Really allow others to be themselves with their creative wants and desires, to be their own person, and really approach others with a sense of unconditional worth and value towards individual differences, and really respecting each other and their own viewpoints. The next one is service to others. And this part of the ethical leadership theory is really follower centric. And it's based on the principles of really placing followers first in the leader's plans. So, kind of with that, it's important to really understand that leader behaviors is things like mentoring behaviors, empowerment behaviors, team building behaviors, citizenship behaviors. We talked a lot about that organizational citizenship behavior type of approach. And also, really, in this type of thing, leaders have a duty to really help others pursue their own legitimate interests and goals. To be a steward of the organization's vision, in serving others, they help to clarify, nurture, and integrate the vision with not for the organizational members. And really, a leader in this sense has an ethical responsibility to make decisions that are beneficial to the welfares of their followers. So not just having that self-serving type of bias, but really taking the time to make sure that the decisions that they're making are beneficial to the followers that they're mentoring and working with and helping to build up. So the next thing is really showing justice. And this tenet is really saying that ethical leaders are concerned with issues of fairness and justice, and they place issues of fairness at the center of their decision making. This type of leader, should adhere to the principles of what we call distributive justice. I know we talked a little bit about that in the past. And really, leader behaviors here, all subordinates are kind of treated in an equal manner. And in special treatments and consideration situations, grounds for being differential in their treatment are really clear and reasonable and based on really sound moral values. So if a leader is going to treat somebody differently, they really have a good reason as to why that they would do something like that. Let's go ahead and jump forward here. So really, these first couple of principles we talked about are really applied in many different situations. And, these things are all applied in very different ways in the sense that it's really according to an individual's need, that person's rights, the individual effort, societal contribution, and for merit and performance. Now, this last two here, the first one, manifesting honesty, is really saying that honest leaders are authentic, but also sensitive to the feelings and attitudes of others. This type of leaders are not deceptive. They really tell the truth with a balance of openness and candor while monitoring and what's appropriate to disclose in a particular situation. And this type of leader really doesn't promise what they can't deliver. They don't really suppress their obligations. They don't evade responsibility, don't evade accountability, and they really don't accept the kind of the survival of the fittest pressures. And this type of leader really acknowledges and rewards honest behavior in the organization. Now, the last tenet of ethical leadership really kind of goes with the sense that there's a concern for common goods means leaders that cannot impose their will on others and search for goals that are compatible with everybody. So a leader in this situation really takes into account the purposes of everybody in the group. They're really attentive to the interests of the community and the culture. They don't force others or ignore intentions of others. So they really take into account and reach kind of out beyond their own mutually defined goals to the wider community. So making sure that all the decisions and everybody inside of the system really are all compatible and really kind of going towards achieving the exact same goals. So that's kind of an overview of ethical leadership, and ethics kind of takes many different lights. So really, let's talk about some of the strengths of ethics, and really, ethics provides a timely research. There's a lot of timely research on ethics. We've been studying ethics since the basically, Greek and Roman Empire, and really, ethics provide a direction how to think about ethical leadership and how to practice it. And really, it suggests that leadership is not an amoral phenomenon that exists, and really the ethics should be considered as integral to the broader domain of leadership. So we really need to highlight these principles and virtues-based leadership that are important to ethical leadership development. Ethics is always criticized in many different things. And most research is based on the Western world and the Anglo-American countries. So there are a lot of differences both culturally and even generationally in how we look at ethics. And it very changes a lot. But ethics is really the nice thing about it. It can be applied to individuals at all different levels of an organization from all different walks of life. And because leadership has this moral and ethical dimension, being a leader really demands awareness on our part of the way that ethics can define our leadership. And really, because leadership is so important, managers and leaders can use information on ethics to understand themselves and to strengthen their own leadership. And leaders can use some of these ethical principles as benchmarks for their own behavior and really understand that leader-follower dynamic is central to ethical leadership as well. So ultimately, that's kind of an overview of ethics. And yeah, check out the discussion board and some of the other supplemental materials that I provided to you on this topic. If you have any questions, as always, let me know. Have a great day.